Now an update on a deadly Elkhart County home invasion that took place last October. 3 teens have been charged with murder for what happened during that break-in and are gearing up for a trial next week. 17-year-old Jose Quiros pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 45 years in prison, 10 years probation, while 17-year-old Blake Lehman, 18-year-old Levi Sparks, and 19-year-old Anthony Sharp will appear again in court Monday, August 19th. NewsCenter 16's TRICIA HARTE joins us now from the studio with more on the outcome of a pretrial hearing for the teens' upcoming case. Trish?
Thanks, Terry. This morning, the 3 remaining teens involved in the break-in appeared in Elkhart Circuit Court for a pretrial hearing. Each of their lawyers had petitioned for individual trials, but those requests were denied. So now, 10 months after the break-in, the teens will all go to trial together. For 10 months, friends and family of Blake Lehman, Levi Sparks, and Anthony Sharp Jr. have been saying one thing.
These kids didn't commit murder. They did not kill anybody. It was awful to know that Blake made a bad choice like that anyways, that them boys even decided to go in the man's house. But to turn so terrible and no murder charges, and he's a 16-year-old boy that's never been away from his family, devastating.
That's Blake Lehman's mother, just weeks after her son and his friends were charged with felony murder. Since then, she's arranged rallies, started online petitions, and asked for the charges to be lessened to burglary.
We're just asking for appropriate charges. We just want the justice system to give these boys a chance at life.
But the prosecutor has been adamant on upholding Indiana law.
People breaking into homes, whether there's someone there, whether there's someone not there, it's got to stop. And from our standpoint, we're going to use every available measure under the law to stop it from this standpoint.
In Indiana, if someone dies during the commission of a crime like burglary, the law says someone has to be held responsible. In this case, the teens will be held responsible together after another one of their petitions was denied, this time for individual trials.
They hadn't been in trouble before. They don't have juvenile records. They made a bad choice that day between the 5 of them, and unfortunately, we already lost one life. I feel if they sentence these boys to years in prison, we just lost 4 more lives.
And this is just application of the law. As with any offense, there are different gradations of it. And burglary in which someone dies is going to have harsher penalties than one where no one is at home. So it really depends.
All right, and you're talking about a penalty here. You know, how long a stretch are these kids looking at? I mean, they're late teens, but they're kids basically. Come on.
Well, when Quiros pleaded guilty back in November, he received 45 years in prison and then 10 years probation on top of that. So if they're convicted, they're likely to face similar charges.
Back 10 months ago, a homeowner shot and killed one of 5 intruders in his Elkhart County home. Now the teens police say are responsible for the break-in are being charged with their friend's murder. 17-year-old Blake Lehman, 18-year-old Levi Sparks, 19-year-old Anthony Sharp Jr., and 17-year-old Jose Quiros were all charged with felony murder for the death of 21-year-old Denzel Johnson. Quiros pleaded guilty last fall, while the trial for the remaining 3 started earlier today. NewsCenter 16's TRICIA HARTE joins us now with more on what's been a slow day of jury selection. Trish, what explains this holdup?
Well, things are moving pretty slowly here. Jury selection has been going on for about 9 hours now, and only 3 jurors have been seated, and they've just dismissed for dinner recess and will be coming back afterwards. Some of this slowness can be attributed to confusion and controversy over the charges themselves. This has been a fairly publicized case. Now, the first 12 jurors called, 9 had heard about the case beforehand. One said he even anticipated on being on this particular trial when he found out the date. And now the prosecutors have spent all day hammering home a definition over what exactly felony murder charges entail, and I've been asking each individual juror whether or not they can apply the law fairly, even if they disagree with the provisions of it. Now, 75 jurors were called to the Elkhart County Circuit Court for jury selection process. The prosecution opened by describing the conditions of the October break-in before going over felony murder charges. They explained how when someone dies during the commission of a felony, those committing the crime are accountable for the death. One by one, jurors were asked whether they would make such a law and apply it without bias in an emotionally charged courtroom. Several preliminary jurors said they felt they shouldn't be on the jury. It was a process that took multiple hours and is still undergoing.
To know that he needs a second chance, he shouldn't be charged with murder. I'm asking that all the boys not be charged with murder, but obviously we're going to go through a trial. I expected, I heard at least a couple days. I wasn't really expecting this long. I mean, we haven't even made it, we're through, yeah, it's this time, and we've only made it through 12 jurors and haven't even get finished with the 12. So I feel like it's making me think trial's going to be a long trial.
Now, the defense also had its hand at talking to the jurors, seeing whether or not they sympathize more with the gun-owning homeowner or the teenage clients. And you could really see today, based on their statements, why they had petitioned originally for separate trials. Each of the defense attorneys had taken a different angle, but once again, their petition for separate trials was denied, so the boys are being tried jointly. And it'll be interesting to see how things shape up as after we move past jury selection over the next couple of days to see where exactly the defense and the state make their cases. Reporting live from Goshen, TRICIA HARTE, News Center 16.
All right, Trish, thanks very much for that. Opening statements and witness testimony started today in the Elkhart County teen home invasion murder trial.
Police say 17-year-old Blake Lehman, 18-year-old Levi Sparks, and 19-year-old Anthony Harp Jr. knowingly burglarized a house on Francis Street in the middle of the day, October 3rd.
The homeowner was inside at the time and shot and killed their accomplice, 21-year-old Denzel Johnson. Now the teens are being charged with felony murder for Johnson's death.
News Center 16's Tricia Hart has been at the courthouse all day and joins us live. So, Tricia, you told us about the attorney's opening statements, but who was brought in to testify as witnesses?
Well, Mo, it was a pretty long list of witnesses today. First, we heard from a corporal who responded to the scene after hearing on dispatch that there had been a shooting. Then we heard from the sergeant who was in charge of the scene before and after the homeowner surrendered to police. Then we heard from several neighbors, detectives, as well as Jose Quiros' mother. That's the defendant who pled guilty back in November. Now, the three teens appeared in Elkhart County Circuit Court this morning. Once again, officers offered insight into their testimony of what it was like immediately after the shooting. They responded within 5 minutes of the 911 call made by Scott and ordered the homeowner to put down his gun and phone to exit the house, backwards, treating him like a suspect until they could verify he was the owner. Other witnesses recalled smelling gunpowder residue in the house and hearing Blake Lehman call out, I'm shot, I'm sorry," from a bedroom closet. That officer described the whole situation as tense because they just weren't sure what it could turn into. It was pointed out that at the time, children had been let off of school buses and there was a lot of safety considerations. The prosecution worked hard to establish locations of witnesses relating to the crime scene exactly to pinpoint those positions.
News Center 16's Tricia Hart joins us live from the Elkhart County Courthouse in Goshen. So, Tricia, what did Quarez say in court?
Well, at first, all he just said was, "I plead the fifth." It was a statement that caused a little bit of stir in the courtroom and definitely wasn't what prosecutors anticipated him saying. The prosecution asked him several questions, one of which was anyone besides your family living with you at your Francis Street home at the time of the break-in? He said, "I plead the fifth." Now, yesterday in court, it was said that Levi Sparks was believed to be living with him at the time, but we heard no more about that in court today. Prosecutors then asked him if he could recall whether or not he told the truth to officers and during his testimony, and once again, he said, "I plead the fifth." Outside the presence of a jury, Quiros was first questioned by attorneys. The three defendants sat and listened as Quiros repeatedly said he couldn't remember the details of his earlier testimony where he laid out the details of the burglary. "All I remember is Denzel Johnson, dying in my arms," he told the court. The prosecution moved to treat Quiros like a hostile witness, firing back at him and asking if his memory loss had anything to do with a visit he received from his aunt and grandmother the night before. He said it didn't. When the jury returned, he said he could only recall three things: getting high, Denzel dying in his arms, and getting chased by police. He claimed he was under the influence of several drugs beyond marijuana on the day of the burglary, all that the prosecution wasn't aware of before today. He then stated he lied in earlier testimonies and that he, not Denzel Johnson, kicked in the door of the Francis Avenue home, and even added that Sparks and Sharp were not involved in any way. And the defense tried to see if Quiros had lied all along, seeing whether or not there was in fact a conspiracy. Quiros responded that his earlier testimony was wrong and that he made it all up all along.
Okay, so did Quiros give any reason for lying about this?
Well, he said that his attorney, a court-appointed public defender, as well as the prosecutor, threatened him into accepting the plea, saying he would spend up to 108 years in prison if he didn't accept this, and that was his testimony today in court.
All right, Tricia Hart reporting live. Thank you. When we first broke the news on the verdict, Tricia Hart was at the courthouse and now joins us live from the newsroom. So, Tricia, can you describe the reaction when the jury read the decision?
Well, it was incredibly emotional. Sitting in the courtroom, you had dozens of members of the teens' extended families and friends, many of whom had been in the court each and every day of the trial. So when the first verdict came back for Anthony Sharp and it was guilty, people just started to break down.
I wish that there would have been a different outcome.
It wasn't a verdict any of Blake Lehman, Levi Sparks, or Anthony Sharp's family wanted.
These boys made a stupid mistake, and for them to have the rest of their lives ruined for this is just awful, and it breaks my heart.
Having been found guilty of felony murder under Indiana law, they now face up to 65-year sentences.
And when they get out, they just have nothing left. This is terrible. I just can't. This is not justice. This is injustice. And I don't know what to say.
Neither did some of the people exiting the courthouse, who were so upset by the decision they were moved to tears. Some even had to be carried. The prosecution stood to the side as grieving family and friends made their way from the courthouse lawn to their cars.
It's certainly a verdict that I think is appropriate.
During closing arguments, the prosecution explained why the charges are appropriate, saying, when a person's conduct results in death, it is a whole different level of accountability.
Is it foreseeable that when you're breaking into a home to commit a burglary, is it foreseeable that things could go bad? Is it foreseeable when you think someone's not home that someone could actually be home? Is it foreseeable that something bad can happen? That's a tough message, but it's the right message, because we have to take a position that when you break into someone's home and you cause damage or damage results, you have to be held accountable.
And yesterday was an extremely long day in court. The homeowner who shot Danzel testified earlier in the afternoon that he felt threatened and scared during the burglary. Then the jury didn't conclude its deliberations until just before 12, so it was really a long day for everyone.
We've been following the trial and conviction of 3 Elkhart teens found guilty of murder after a break-in turned deadly last year. With sentencing set for this week, the next move is possible appeals.
18-year-olds Blake Lehman and Levi Sparks and 19-year-old Anthony Sharp Jr. were found guilty in August for the death of Danzel Johnson, who was shot and killed by a homeowner during a burglary. They face a maximum sentence of 65 years for felony murder. NewsCenter 16's Tricia Hart has been following this trial and joins us from the newsroom. So, Tricia, is it any surprise that the families plan to appeal?
Not at all. The families, particularly the Lehmans, are continuing to fight the murder charges, saying they're not completely innocent, but they're also not murderers. Now, the prosecution's applied Indiana law to the facts of this case, saying that the family is actually drawing attention to the law and informing folks about the seriousness of something like burglary. The jury's guilty verdict prompted an eruption of emotion. Now, after some time, families of the teens are ready to appeal.
We were shocked, and we're not going to give up. We don't feel these boys should be looking at 45 to 65 years in prison for a mistake that they made, which was, yes, a very stupid mistake, but they didn't take that boy's life.
According to Indiana law, felony murder applies when someone kills another human being while committing or attempting to commit arson, burglary, or a number of other crimes.
The concept of an actor being responsible for all of the things that occurred as a result of that act is nothing new in the law. In terms of fairness, this law was here. I determined that the law was applicable to these facts.
But as the defense moves towards appeal, it's saying the application wasn't appropriate.
The felony murder law falls under the category of a law that requires a judgment. Can we do it? Should we do it? I think it's a strange circumstance in this case where you have a homeowner that killed one of the individuals, and holding the others responsible for that, I don't believe made any sense.
Sparks' lawyer says it's, quote, nonsensical to group them under the murder statute, but prosecutors say it's important to take all felonies seriously.
We don't like the fact that young people go to jail, but I also don't like the fact that young people are finding a way to commit crimes of this nature. And 12 citizens of this community are the ones who made the determination that the law and the facts apply in this particular case.
Now, sentencing in this case will happen on Thursday this week. The teens face 45 years as a minimum and up to 65 years. Mo?
Okay, Tricia, so is the defense confident about an appeal?
You know, it's hard to say, but Sparks' lawyer argues that these are kind of unusual circumstances because the teens weren't armed when they entered the house. And most appellate cases, he says, deal with armed perpetrators. So it's one of those, you have to wait and see how that turns out.
All right, Tricia Hart live from the newsroom. Thank you.